this is Fast Facts History for this week's video. In this video, I will be discussing a historical event that relates to a recent issue in U.S. politics. I will be discussing the Battle of Bladensburg, the only time that the capital was invaded by a foreign or domestic force. So for a quick summary of the battle, for those who need a quick and short synopsis before I dive into detail. The Battle of Bladensburg was the 1814 battle between the Americans and the British fought in Maryland. It's considered to be the greatest disgrace ever dealt to American arms. At the battle, the British forces routed the Americans and continued to march down to Washington, D.C. following the victory. Once they got to the city, they burned it down, including major landmarks such as the Capitol building and the White House. It was the only time that the federal capital ever felt an invading force, and other than January 2021, the only other time the Capitol building was ever attacked and breached. Now for a British perspective and background. Before the battle, the British were busy putting down Napoleon in Europe in a series of proxy wars. Following more than a decade of fighting, the forces were able to defeat Napoleon and exile him to Elba. As they were simultaneously still fighting the War of 1812, the armies could now focus their attention on the Americans. Prior to the battle, the British held the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, which is connected to the Delaware River and Potomac River, which bordered Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. respectively. In addition, the British had reserves under Robert Ross in Bermuda in case of a need for a blockade. So now, Ross left Bermuda for the Chesapeake Bay prior to the battle. In the American point of view, President James Madison was sitting in his war room discussing plans with his advisors on the threat. He was planning on fortifying Washington in addition to the coastline. However, War Secretary John Armstrong did not agree and did not fortify the capital since he thought the British would attack Baltimore. He turned out to be partly correct, as the British did try to take over Fort McHenry off of Baltimore, yet ultimately this decision cost the Americans the victory. The commanders of each side had experience, yet it seemed the British would win on that one as well. The British forces were commanded by the aforementioned Robert Ross, and George Cockburn also assisted in leading troops. On the American side, forces were led by Joshua Barney, and he also had help from William Winder. The stage for the battle was set, and President Madison as well as many advisors actually attended the battle in person. However, they weren't in for a treat. The Americans set up defenses at Bladensburg, while the British would cross the eastern branch of the Potomac River known as the Anacostia. The forces clashed for 3 hours, and even though the Americans were larger in numbers, the troops lacked proper training and proper equipment, so the lines weren't able to support one another. The British stormed the bridge and crossed the river and pushed the Americans back. One by one, the defensive lines fell apart, and only the third line made a heroic stand. Barney and his 400 flotilla men tried to hold out the British until they were outflanked and Barney was wounded. Madison had begun a hasty retreat back to the city as they saw the losing forces and sent word to First Lady Dolly Madison to evacuate the White House with as much possessions as possible. Following the battle, the British marched onto D.C. and destroyed almost all of the public buildings. The White House was set on fire, and First Lady Madison tried to save as much as she could. Among this was the famous story of the George Washington portrait, which she saved at the last minute before the fire. The British simply left following the decimation of the city. However, why is it important to talk about this more than 200 years after it happened? It's because of how it relates to the current events of what has recently happened. On January 6th, pro-Trump supporters attacked the Capitol building during a congressional session where the Electoral College was being certified. The mob breached the building and broke windows to get inside. After they got inside, congresspersons had to be taken to a secret bunker as people trashed their offices. People flew Confederate flags, stole podiums, and left pipe bombs in an attempted coup of the congressman and the vice president. It is important to realize that the last time the U.S. government saw such a threat was during wartime and with another country. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified whenever I post. And if you want to have a say in what videos you want me to post every week, feel free to join the Discord server where I will have posts out for what topics you want me to see. Until then, see you next week.